Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? I'm Nathan Mercereau, and as a financial advisor with over 25 years of experience, I've learned that the quality of the people you spend time with is a lot more valuable than what can show up in a set of financial projections. And growing up in Canada, I discovered you can learn a lot about a person when you spend a day in a canoe with them. So I created this show where I interview people I find interesting and inspiring. I invite you to listen in and learn from their stories so you can create the life you want, one filled with wealth, wisdom, meaning, and purpose. I'm delighted today to welcome Ed Morton to Day in a Canoe podcast. Ed has been an accomplished executive and leader over the course of his career, from serving in the military to working as CEO for NCH Healthcare System to being a portfolio manager to being on a number of boards. And Ed, it's a delight to chat with you today. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with listeners your timeline. I think you've had an interesting story as a Floridian and experienced a lot in life. And I'm sure listeners are curious to listen and learn from you.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. My background is kind of simple. My dad was a retired Irish cop from NYPD. My mom was a telephone operator for AT&T in the 20s and 30s. My dad was a cop from the late 20s through World War II. I didn't come along till late in both their lives. My mom was roughly 40. My dad was a little bit older than that. They moved to the Florida Keys, and that's where I was raised, in a little town called Alamorada. My dad, by day, was a small grocery store operator, and by night he was a commercial fisherman, fishing for yellowtail in Alamorada. My mom was a homemaker at the time. We stayed in Alamorada as my sister and I, for our early formative years. And at some point, my dad came to the conclusion that we both needed a better education if we were going to get out of the Florida Keys and seek some kind of a career. So my dad bought a small home in Miami, Florida, and we went to school. We went to parochial school in Miami, my sister and I, and we would go Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, my mom would drive us back, and we'd work in my dad's store and or go fishing for yellowtail and help my dad as much as we could. Eventually, I went to a Catholic prep school in Miami, Christopher Columbus High School. Did well both academically and athletically, and I eventually wound up going to the University of Notre Dame. An interesting tidbit, I went to Notre Dame never having seen snow of any real depth. I didn't even have a coat when I arrived, so I was somewhat of a Keys bumpkin, so to speak. I learned a great deal about weather in South Bend. I went to Notre Dame for undergraduate, also joined ROTC, ran track. I liked being an athlete at Notre Dame because I was exempt from all of the duties in ROTC other than going to class. Didn't have to do drill or anything. Anyway, I graduated, became a second lieutenant in the United States Army. I spent better part of 3 years during the Vietnam War. I was an explosive ordnance officer. Served, came back to the world in 1972. Started to work for Ernst & Ernst, which was an accounting firm at the time. I was sent over to Naples, Florida on the third job that I had with Ernst & Ernst. It was a hospital. I performed the audit along with a couple of other folks that were part of the firm. And it went well. They offered me a job. In fact, when I came home, I remember telling my wife, we have an opportunity to go to Naples. She said, what's in Naples? By the way, I was in the Miami office of Ernst & Ernst. So it's a little simple fishing village on the other side, but I think it's going to grow. Long story short, we moved to Naples in 1972. I became the controller at the time because the controller at the time had, about a week previous, had a heart attack. And I spent the next 20 years in Naples as the chief financial officer. I eventually became the chief operating officer, and then I became the CFO, eventually the CEO. And I spent roughly the last decade running the system. And it grew from a small community hospital into a major medical center. And we operated 800 beds. And we had about 5,500 employees and about 700 doctors on the staff, and all of the variety and array of support organizations from surgery centers to nursing homes to laboratories, most of them organized as separate, distinct corporations. So I had quite a breadth and a scope and a responsibility in the healthcare world. While I was at NCH, went to the University of Miami. I got an MBA, then an MHA. After 35 years with NCH, I retired in 2006-7. I immediately went to work as partner with an investment firm, Wasmer Schroeder. And my connectivity to Wasmer Schroeder had been, they managed a great deal of the hospital money, so to speak, for about 15 years while I was there, and I got to know the partners very well. And they invited me to join them. I became a partner in 2007, and I stayed there until we sold the firm recently to Charles Schwab. And now I'm in the world of private equity. I work in private equity as the vice chairman of the board of a private equity firm headquartered in Austin, Texas. And along the way, I acquired an additional degree from Florida Gulf Coast University, which is the local university here in Southwest Florida. I attended Morton and got certified in management. I've been a lifelong proponent of education, which also ties back to my passion. As my mom and dad emphasized to my sister and I, education was the way that we were going to get up and out. And neither my mom or dad graduated from high school. So I hear a lot of people talk about, I'm the first person to graduate from college. I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school. My sister followed me the year later. And I owe a great deal to my mom and dad for seeing that a Keys kid could leave the Keys, get a good education, go to great schools, serve their country, have a great career. Along the way, I married my elementary school sweetheart. My wife and I have been married 53 years, but we have, quote, dated since we were in the fifth grade. And we've known each other all of our lives, really. I've had a great life partner and been able to raise 4 wonderful children, all of whom did graduate from college and had productive careers on their own. And it's been a good life. And I've learned along the way that we have to give back as much as we take from society. We have a responsibility to give back to it. So as you alluded to, I've been involved with quite a few charitable and educational organizations in my lifetime. And I believe that we have a very strong responsibility to give to others the opportunity we were given. That's been a passion of mine.
Thank you for that overview, and congratulations on your 53 years. Such a wonderful accomplishment. Thank you for your service over time as well. I appreciate your perspective around education, and it is so critical for so many people to engage in learning. But I'm also aware of the School of Life giving some of the best educational insights. What are some takeaways as you look at your career that you can say were meaningful lessons that you learned along the way?
Well, one, I learned from my mistakes, which is experience is a wonderful teacher. I learned a couple of things. I was able to get through high school pretty easily, and I wound up going to a good school where I found the importance of paying attention to detail and learning good study habits. I almost flunked out in my freshman year. I learned that discipline and opening a book is critical to graduating from a good university. So I learned a great deal about discipline and time management, which was important with the education I received. In the military, I learned valuable life lessons about management. I was part of a special operations group that operated out of National Airport. And I was part of a group called the Army Materiel Command Special Operations Office. And we operated small teams. And we did and executed missions that were involved with various weapon systems that were being developed at the time during the midst of the Vietnam War. We had to determine how effective and efficient these weapon systems were. But what I learned was that you operate whether you're running a company or whether you're involved in a smaller military operation, the cohesiveness of the group is critical, and that trust is critical. That I've got my back, You've got my back, I've got your back. That together we operate monolithically. There is no I. We hear that all the time. There is no I in team, but there is no I. It's all about us as a group. And as a leader, I was a second lieutenant, then a first lieutenant, then a captain. My responsibility was to convey to a group of other men a belief that together we can do something, we can accomplish something. The importance of the mission and why. It's not telling people how. Life is not about telling people how to do the job. They understand how to do the job. My job is to make sure they have the resources. My job is to do the responsibility that I pull my end of the load. If I'm operating a team of people and we're in the midst of the jungle, or we're somewhere that is arduous to get around. If I'm not carrying the same amount of weight, if I'm not eating the same kind of food, if I'm not chewing the same kind of dirt, how do I know what they can do? I've got to be able to relate to what they do. So never forget your roots. Never forget that the people who get up every day and work with you, they have bills to pay, they have families to raise, they have children, they have dreams, they have responsibilities. We're no different. Whether one position or the other position, we have to operate monolithically. So from the military, I learned the value of teamwork. I learned the value of trust. I learned the value of culture. And we don't leave people behind. I learned the value that the guy with the rifle is just as important as the guy with the captain bars. That if one person doesn't do their job, we all don't do our job. So I learned from the military the value of culture, and a word I would convey to some of your listeners is influence. Leadership, and when you distill it to its essence, there's only one word, it's leadership. Do you believe? Do you believe we can do this together? Do you believe in what we're doing? Are you committed, not involved? Involvement is like, and commitment are entirely different concepts. It's like bacon and eggs for breakfast. The chicken's involved, the pig is committed. I want people that are committed to our mission. I want them influenced. I want them to believe. I want them to understand why we're doing what we're doing. I want to make sure they have the resources. And the last part of that ingredient is accountability. We will be held accountable. Did we or did we not accomplish the mission? Did we satisfy ourselves that we gave everything we could to accomplish that mission? Because we believed. I believed. They believed. So from the military, I took these concepts that were somewhat, I thought, misunderstood in the civilian world. And when I became someone who worked in a larger organization, as I said, I worked with a small group, somewhat a specialized kind of a military organization. But I was able to take those lessons and translate that into the civilian world, into the hospital. And I understood that if I'm going to succeed in this hospital, I have to be able to influence people. They have to believe in me. They have to trust me. I have to make sure they have the resources. I have to hold them accountable. But we move together. And I don't care if you are, as CEO, I would say this oftentimes to our employees. I don't care if you're cutting the yard or you're doing brain surgery. That person cutting the yard creates a first impression. You come into our hospital and the yard looks like the devil and it hasn't been trimmed and it's not what it should be. That's your first impression. If we don't treat people with dignity, that's another thing, is the importance of treating all of us. I don't care what level treat people with dignity and believe in what we're doing collectively. So sometimes once in a while, the doctor would get a little upset with me because I give a speech about how important the housekeepers are, or the dietary people, or the engineering people, the maintenance people of the institution. But they're critical. Without it, you can't do your job. And none of us will accomplish our mission unless all of us believe in what we're doing. So I was able to take that, I believe, and I think history would reflect that our organization became pretty successful. And we transitioned from a community hospital into a major medical center that when I retired, had achieved a lot of accolades on a national basis. One of the finer heart units in the United States now is right here in Naples, Florida. And I attribute that to my military experience. I don't think without that, I would have had these valuable life lessons that I was able to translate for everybody. So that is a part of the formative part of my life. One of the other interesting to your financial people, one of the more interesting takeaways I had from the military was when you find yourself in extraordinary circumstances in let's say a firefight, and it subsides and the smoke clears, and all of a sudden somebody shows up, and they've got a Coke can. I'll never forget, it's imprinted on my brain. They've got Coke. So I'm thinking, if this product can get into the middle of a firefight, this product could go everywhere. So I remember tucking that away in my head. When it came back to the world, I started buying Coke stock. And I figured the power of the brand can transcend, and actually brought me some comfort in circumstances that were hard to understand. But this was part of home. And the fact that that product could get to me there told me it could get anywhere in the world. So my family's also been a beneficiary of some, I think, acknowledgement and recognition that Coke and other brands were part of America. And so at a young age, I started investing in some well-known brands, and it's served our family well over the years. So that's another valuable lesson, that intangibles have value. It's easy to go through the financial statement and look at the IRR. We could talk about all the technical aspects we want, but there are intangibles that determine value. And some people recognize that. It took Buffett quite a while to understand that. Somebody explained to him the value of a brand, and he bought Coca-Cola well after I bought it, which I liked because it increased the value even more. But the other thing is to listen to other people. There is no one way to do anything, and an idea of an individual, of a human being, is a sovereign thing. One of the best stock tips I ever got in my life, which I did not act on, came from a maintenance man who came into my office when I was CEO and said, I think you should buy Apple stock. And his name was Emil Perot. I still remember him vividly. Apple stock's trading at $7 a share, and he called it a hat size. That's another thing, a term that I remember he used. He said, you should buy Apple stock. This guy's job is going to turn it around again. Well, I didn't. Emil bought a lot of Apple stock, and as an engineer, maintenance guy, changing light bulbs and whatever, he lives in a waterfront home on Marco Island worth multiple seven figures. I should have listened to Emil. But the value is, you don't know the value of what people are giving you unless some time has to elapse, obviously. But the dignity of a human thought, the dignity of one person, and what their dreams and their aspirations and their input can be. As Buffett learned, I learned. The next time he told me to buy something, I did buy some of it. It went up pretty well. It was Chico's. So I still remember that story. But I think teamwork is critical. And I was able to use those lessons all the way in my life. And I wouldn't be where I was or where I am. I wouldn't be successful if it wasn't for my military background, and for a lot of patients, for a lot of employees, a lot of people who mentored me.